A week from today, Turkish voters will go to the polls in a runoff election between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the opposition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. As I told you earlier, Erdogan performed better than expected in the first round, getting 49.5% of the vote, just shy of the 50% benchmark that would have returned him directly to the presidency without a runoff. Erdogan's strong showing is all the more surprising given the fact that under his tenure, Turkey's economy has nosedived. The country has one of the world's highest rates of inflation. It is now currently at 43%, having peaked at over 85% last year. Foreign investors have fled Turkey under Erdogan's rule. Erdogan has played up a culture war between his base, conservative, often rural, religious Muslim voters, and the country's secular elite. Does his strong showing suggest that culture matters more to Turkish voters than the economy? If so, it's not a political phenomenon specific to Turkey. We see it all over the world. Joining me now to talk about the appeal of strongmen like Erdogan is Pippa Norris. She is a comparative political scientist at the Harvard Kennedy School. She's the author of many books, including Cultural Backlash, Trump, Brexit, and Authoritarian Populism. Pippa, welcome.
Thank you, Fareed. A pleasure to be with you.
Let's talk about the kind of ideology of this populism, because it is often anti-elite. It's anti these distant elites, overeducated, secular, cosmopolitan. And this plays very well in Mexico for AMLO. It plays well in Colombia. It plays well in Europe against Macron. It plays well in the United States. And it's playing well in Turkey. It's played well in India. Why do you think, what is happening in the world that we have this wave of anti-elitism directed towards all these so-called secular elites?
So, as you say, authoritarian populism in particular, on the right, is very much, it's about anti-corruption, arguing that the established institutions, the groups in academia who've been leading, those in the media, those who are the judges and the courts, as well as those in politics who've been there for many years, the incumbents, they're corrupt, they're deeply self-serving. That's the first claim. And to some extent, there is evidence clearly of widespread corruption in many countries around the world and problems of scandals about money and politics, for example. And then the other claim is that the populist leader, particularly in presidential systems, can come in and basically save the country, be very patriotic, but act in order to clean out the stables, in order to bring a fresh perspective into politics. Now, in some cases, that's simply rhetoric, in particular where a leader has been in power for many years, as Erdogan has, and as Bolsonaro, for example, had been, as well as a senator. And in many other countries, the leaders remake themselves and appear as though they're a fresh force. And what they claim, above all, is that they're going to speak for you. And in an us-them situation, where the country is deeply divided between us and them, however them is defined, however us is defined, that the leader is going to protect and speak for you. As Donald Trump said in his most recent talk, I am your retribution.
And it feels like the strong showing of Erdogan and the showing that Trump has with in the Republican primary polls, and as I said, if you look at the last 2 years of elections in Latin America, what it seems to show me is this cultural force, this cultural backlash is not over by a long stretch, that we are in for we are in for an age of this cultural politics.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's about a tipping point in some ways in many countries. And the problem, if we think about the United States, is this, that the traditional attitudes towards, for example, the roles of women and men as being binary, or towards homosexuality, or towards many other liberal things like guns, in the public, over a long-term pattern, they've changed. They've become more liberal. They've moved, as the arc of history would suggest, in a more liberal direction. But unfortunately, many people feel that they've been left behind by those trends, that they don't agree with them, that their core moral values, what they stand for, whether it's about God and religion, whether it's about marriage and the family, whether it's about hard work and how one gets ahead in America versus a stronger welfare system, all of these are things which create cultural and moral divisions. And it's very difficult to compromise on moral issues if you think that one thing is clearly right, the other thing is clearly wrong. And of course, that means that that group, the social conservative groups, has gradually been shrinking in popular attitudes. If you look at public opinion polls, it's say in the Gallup series. But they still are large enough in the country that if they mobilize, if they organize, if they get money from donors, if they vote, and many of the older populations are much stronger at voting than the younger populations, then they can still get their candidate in. So it's a battle for essentially the cultural hearts and minds, and it can go either way. I don't think we can necessarily assume that authoritarian populists are going to rise to power everywhere. There have been some mixed electoral fortunes, and candidates from the centre-left can do quite well. And so obviously all is still to play for in the United States and the United Kingdom in the next general election, and in many other countries as well.
Pippa, Norris, always a pleasure to read your research on this and to hear from you in person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fareed.